The Villani were dying, and the whole galaxy had decided to let them die. Commander Laura Bennett stood on the bridge of her starship, called the Resolute, and she looked at the holographic display in front of her with a heavy heart. The planet Villara floated in the darkness of space like a sick and wounded thing. Its atmosphere was filled with thick volcanic ash that blocked out the sunlight. The eruption had started 3 months ago, and it had not stopped since then. The entire world was choking to death, and the species that lived there had no way to save themselves. Villani were beautiful creatures with soft, translucent skin that glowed faintly in different colors based on their emotions. They had large dark eyes that could see in very low light, and their bodies were thin and delicate. They had evolved on a peaceful world with gentle weather and clean air and filtered sunlight. They had never needed to be tough or strong because their planet had always been kind to them. They had no army and no weapons and no ships that could carry them away from their dying home. They were completely helpless. Lieutenant Kevin Park walked up to the command station with a data pad in his hand, and his face showed the anger he was feeling inside. He was a young officer with sharp eyes and a quick mind, and he had been reading the diplomatic messages from the Galactic Concord for the past hour. Each message made him more frustrated than the last one. The Galactic Concord rejected the Villani. "Request for help 6 days ago," he said to Commander Bennett. "They said the Villani have no strategic value, and the cost of saving them would be too high. They basically said these people are not worth the effort." Laura turned to look at him, and her expression was calm, but her eyes were cold. She had read those messages herself, and every single word had made her sick to her stomach. The Villani had sent appeals to 17 different spacefaring civilizations begging for any kind of assistance. All 17 had said no. The Tarathi claimed they did not have enough resources to spare. The Khazari argued that saving the Villani would go against the natural order of things. The Malvik had not even bothered to respond at all. One by one, every advanced species in the galaxy had turned their backs on a dying world. Dr. Grace Martinez was the ship's xenobiologist, and she had been studying the Villani situation. Since they first received the distress signals, she was a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and steady hands, and she had dedicated her life to understanding alien life forms. Right now, she was looking at population projections on her screen, and the numbers were terrible. There are approximately 400 million Villani still alive on the planet, she reported in a quiet voice. But that number is getting smaller every hour. Their respiratory systems were not designed to handle this level of pollution. The ash particles are too small and too sharp, and they are tearing up the lungs of everyone who breathes them in. If nothing changes, then the entire species will be extinct within 90 days. 400 million people, Laura thought to herself. 400 million living, thinking, feeling beings who had done nothing wrong except be born on a planet that was now trying to kill them. They had committed no crimes. They had started no wars. They had simply existed peacefully for thousands of years until nature itself turned against them, and the galaxy had looked at their suffering and decided it was not worth caring about. The bridge of the Resolute was quiet as every officer present understood what their commander was thinking about. Humanity had only discovered faster than light travel 40 years ago, which meant they were still newcomers to the galactic community. The elder races looked down on them with a mixture of fear and suspicion. Earth had been classified as a Category 7 death world, which meant it was considered one of the most dangerous planets in known space. The gravity was crushing. The weather was violent and unpredictable. The wildlife was deadly. Diseases mutated constantly. Natural disasters struck without warning. And somehow, against all odds, life had not only survived on Earth, but had thrived there. The other species called humans Deathworlders, and they did not mean it as a compliment. They saw humanity as dangerous and aggressive and unpredictable. They worried about what these tough, resilient creatures might do now that they had access to the stars. Some species wanted to isolate humanity. Others wanted to watch them carefully. Very few wanted to trust them. But Laura Bennett had not joined the fleet to make the elder races comfortable. She had joined because she believed in something bigger than politics and profit. She believed that when you had the power to help someone who was suffering, then you had the responsibility to do it. She believed that strength meant nothing if you only used it to protect yourself. She turned to her communications officer, who was a young woman named Hannah Cole, with red hair and freckles across her nose. Hannah had been listening to the conversation with growing concern because she could see where this was heading. "Get me a secure channel to Admiral Cruz at Fleet Command," Laura ordered. "Priority 1 encryption. I need to speak with her immediately." Hannah nodded and her fingers moved quickly across her console. It only took a few minutes to establish the connection, and soon the face of Admiral Patricia Cruz appeared on the main view screen. The Admiral was a stern woman with gray hair and sharp, intelligent eyes, and she had commanded respect throughout her entire career. She looked at Laura with an expression that suggested she already knew what this call was about. "Commander Bennett," the Admiral said, "I assume you have been monitoring the Valara situation." "Yes, Admiral," Laura replied. "I have also been monitoring the Concorde's response to it. Or rather, their complete lack of response." The Admiral nodded slowly. "The decision has caused some discussion here at Fleet Command as well. There are many who believe we should follow the Concorde's lead and stay out of it. And what do you believe, Admiral?" There was a long pause before Admiral Cruz answered. She looked at Laura through the screen, and something passed between them. An understanding. A shared sense of values that went deeper than ranks and regulations. "I believe that 400 million innocent people are going to die if someone does not help them," the Admiral finally said. "And I believe that humanity did not survive everything we survived just to become another species that ignores suffering because it is convenient." Laura felt a wave of relief wash over her. She had been prepared to argue and fight and convince, but it seemed she did not need to. The Admiral understood. The Admiral agreed. "Start running calculations for atmospheric processors," Laura said to her crew. "We are going to need as many as we can get. The Villani cannot filter the ash from their air, but we can build machines that will do it for them. We are going to save those people whether the galaxy likes it or not." The crew of the Resolute began working immediately, and there was a new energy on the bridge. They had a mission now. They had a purpose. The galaxy had abandoned the Villani, but humanity would not. The Deathworlders were coming to help. Admiral Patricia Cruz had not slept in 36 hours, and she had no plans to sleep anytime soon. The Situation Room at Earth's Orbital Command Station was filled with noise and tension as officers and diplomats and politicians argued with each other about what humanity should do. The Villani crisis had divided opinions sharply, and everyone seemed to have a different idea about the right course of action. Some wanted to help immediately. Others wanted to stay far away from the whole mess. The debate had been going on for hours, and tempers were running hot. Councilman Gregory Stone was one of the loudest voices against intervention. He was a heavy-set man with thinning hair and small eyes that always seemed to be calculating something. He had built his political career on caution and careful planning, and he saw the Villani situation as nothing but risk with no reward. "We cannot afford this," he said, for what felt like the 100th time. His face was red, and he was sweating through his expensive suit. "The Galactic Concorde has made their position perfectly clear. They do not want anyone interfering with Valara. If we go against their wishes, we could face economic sanctions or trade restrictions or even military action. We are still a young species in this galaxy. We cannot afford to make enemies of everyone." Admiral Cruz listened to him with a calm expression, but inside, she was growing tired of his arguments. She understood the risks better than anyone in the room. She had spent her entire career studying galactic politics and military strategy. She knew exactly what humanity stood to lose by defying the Concorde. But she also knew what they stood to lose by doing nothing. "And if we stay home," she replied in a steady voice, "then 400 million people will die. They will die slowly and painfully while we sit here and watch. They will suffocate in the ash and choke on the poison in their own air. Children will die in the arms of their parents. Entire families will be wiped out generation by generation until there is no one left. Is that what you want, Councilman? Is that the kind of species you want humanity to be?" Gregory Stone shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He did not like being challenged, especially not in front of so many important people. But he was not ready to back down either. "They are not our people," he said. "They are not our responsibility. We did not cause this disaster, and we have no obligation to fix it. The universe is harsh, and sometimes species die. That is simply the way things are." The room fell silent after his words. Several people looked down at the table, unwilling to meet anyone's eyes. The truth was that many of them agreed with Stone even if they did not want to admit it out loud. Humanity had its own problems to deal with, its own colonies to build, its own future to secure. Why should they sacrifice so much for strangers on the other side of the galaxy? Admiral Cruz stood up slowly, and she looked around the room at every single face. She saw fear and doubt and selfishness in some of those faces, but she also saw hope and courage and compassion in others. She knew which side she was on, and she knew it was time to make that clear. Humanity did not claw its way out of the darkness, just to become another species that turns away from suffering, she said, and her voice carried the weight of absolute conviction. "We did not survive ice ages and plagues and world wars and the near destruction of our own planet just so we could sit safely in our corner of space and pretend that other people's pain does not matter. That is not who we are. That has never been who we are." She paused and let her words sink in before continuing. "When disaster struck our ancestors, they did not ask whether the victims were from their tribe or their nation or their continent. They helped because helping was the right thing to do. When earthquakes destroyed cities on the other side of the world, we sent rescue teams and supplies and money. When famines swept through regions we had never visited, we shipped food and medicine and hope. We did these things not because we expected something in return, but because we understood that all people deserve compassion. All people deserve a chance to live." Councilman Stone opened his mouth to argue, but Admiral Cruz cut him off with a sharp look. "The Villani are people," she said firmly. "They think and feel and love and dream just like we do. They have families and friends and hopes for the future. They have done nothing to deserve extinction, and we have the power to save them. Maybe not all of them, but many of them. Enough of them. If we turn our backs now, then we are no better than the Tarathi, or the Kasari, or any of the other species that decided 400 million lives were not worth the trouble." She looked directly at Stone, and her eyes were hard as steel. "I will not be part of that decision," she said. "And I do not believe the people of Earth will either. We are going to Valara. We are going to save as many Villani as we can, and we are going to show the galaxy what it really means to be a Death Worlder." The vote was called within the hour, and it was not even close. The decision to launch a humanitarian mission to Valara passed with overwhelming support. Councilman Stone and his allies were outnumbered by those who believed in something greater than fear and self-interest. Within 48 hours, the largest relief fleet in human history was assembled, in orbit around Earth. 37 ships of various sizes and functions were loaded with everything the Villani would need to survive. Massive cargo haulers carried atmospheric processors that could filter the ash from the air. Medical frigates were stocked with supplies and staffed with doctors and nurses who had volunteered for the dangerous mission. Transport vessels were configured to evacuate civilians from the worst affected areas. Engineering ships carried construction equipment and materials to build emergency shelters. Commander Laura Bennett was given command of the entire fleet, and she accepted the responsibility with a solemn nod. She knew the risks better than anyone. She knew that some of her people might not come home, but she also knew that this was exactly the kind of mission she had always dreamed of leading. The journey to Valara took 11 days, and during that time, the crew prepared themselves for what they would find. They studied the Villani language and culture. They trained in hazardous environment protocols. They reviewed emergency medical procedures for alien physiology. They did everything they could to be ready. When the fleet finally dropped out of faster-than-light travel and Valara appeared on their screens, there was a moment of stunned silence on every bridge. The planet was shrouded in darkness. Thick clouds of ash blocked out almost all of the sunlight. Fires burned on the surface, visible even from orbit. Distress signals filled every communication, frequency growing weaker by the hour as more and more transmitters failed. Laura opened a channel to the planet, and she spoke clearly so that anyone listening could understand this. "Is Commander Laura Bennett of the Earth vessel Resolute? We have come to help you. Please respond if you can hear us." The silence stretched on for several agonizing seconds. Then a voice came through the speakers, thin and trembling and filled with disbelief. "You came. The Death Worlders actually came." Laura felt tears forming in her eyes, but she blinked them away. There would be time for emotions later. Right now there was work to do. "Yes, we came," she replied. "And we are not leaving until your people are safe." The work on Valara was brutal and exhausting, and it never seemed to end. Chief Engineer Samuel Rivera had been on the planet's surface for 16 hours straight, and his entire body ached with tiredness. He was wearing a heavy hazmat suit that protected him from the toxic air, but it also made every movement feel like he was dragging weights through mud. The ash fell constantly like gray snow, covering everything in a thick layer of choking dust. The sky was so dark that it felt like permanent night, even though the sun was supposed to be shining somewhere. Above the clouds, Samuel had never designed atmospheric processors for alien worlds before this mission. He had never worked in conditions this dangerous or this unforgiving. Back on Earth, he had been a talented engineer who specialized in air filtration systems for space stations and colony domes. He was good at his job, but nothing in his experience had prepared him for Valara. None of that mattered now. The Villani were dying, and Samuel had the skills to help save them, so he pushed through the exhaustion and kept working. "Unit 17 is online," he reported through his helmet communicator as he finished connecting the last power coupling. His voice was hoarse from hours of breathing recycled air. "That gives us coverage for the Northern Settlement Cluster. How are things looking from up there, Resolute?" Dr. Grace Martinez answered from orbit, where she was monitoring the atmospheric data in real time. "Particulate levels in that region are starting to drop," she said, and there was cautious hope in her voice. "It is happening slowly, but it is definitely happening. The Villani sheltering in that area should start breathing easier within 6 hours." 6 hours. Samuel allowed himself a small, tired smile beneath his helmet visor. On Earth, a project this size would have taken months of planning and approvals and paperwork before anyone even started building anything. Here on Valara, they were deploying industrial equipment in days and saving thousands of lives with each unit they brought online. But the planet was fighting them every step of the way. The volcanic activity that had started this disaster was still ongoing deep beneath the surface. The ground shook with tremors several times each day, and new fissures opened up without warning. 3 human workers had already been injured when the Earth split open beneath their feet. One supply shuttle had been caught in a pyroclastic surge and forced into an emergency crash landing. The pilot had survived, but barely. Valara did not want to be saved. The planet seemed almost angry at the humans who had come to heal its wounds. But the humans kept coming anyway. In the largest remaining Villani settlement, a being named Elder Counselor Tyrell watched the strange visitors from Earth with a mixture of wonder and confusion. Tyrell was old even by Villani standards, having lived for nearly 200 years. His translucent skin had faded with age, and his large dark eyes had seen more than most of his kind would ever see. He had witnessed the golden age of Villani civilization, and he had watched it crumble when the volcano erupted. Tyrell had been the one to send the distress calls to the galaxy. He had composed careful diplomatic messages to 17 different species begging for any kind of help. He had used every argument he could think of, appealing to mercy and justice and simple decency. And one by one, every single species had refused. He had prepared himself for death after that. He had gathered his people and told them to face the end with dignity and grace, as their ancestors would have wanted. He had accepted that the Villani story was coming to its final chapter. Then the humans arrived. Tyrell did not understand these creatures at all. They came from a world that was classified as one of the most dangerous in the known galaxy. Their planet had crushing gravity and extreme weather, and predators that could tear apart most other species. They had evolved to survive in conditions that would kill a Volani in minutes. They were tough and strong and resilient, in ways that seemed almost impossible, and yet they had traveled across the stars to save strangers. They had never met Commander Laura Bennett, made regular visits to the surface to check on the progress of the relief efforts, and to meet with the Volani leadership. She was always busy and always tired, but she made time to speak with Tyrell, because she understood how important it was to give the Volani hope. During one of these visits, Tyrell finally asked the question that had been burning in his mind since the humans first arrived. Your people are suffering. For us, he said, and his skin flickered with colors that indicated deep confusion. They are getting hurt. Some of them might die. Why would you do this for us? We have nothing to offer you. We cannot pay you back. We are weak and helpless, and the rest of the galaxy decided we were not worth saving. So why did you come? Laura looked at the elderly Volani and she considered his question carefully. It was not the first time someone had asked her this, and she suspected it would not be the last. The answer was complicated, but also very simple. Because we know what it means to struggle, she finally said. We come from a world that tried to kill us every single day. The weather wanted to freeze us, or burn us, or drown us. The animals wanted to eat us. The diseases wanted to destroy us from the inside. And for a long time, we were weak and helpless too. We almost went extinct more than once. She paused and looked out at the ash-covered landscape where human and Volani workers were laboring side by side. But we survived, she continued. Not because we were the strongest or the fastest or the smartest. We survived because we helped each other. When one tribe was starving, another tribe shared food. When one village was attacked, other villages came to defend it. We learned that the only way to make it through the darkness was to hold on to each other and refuse to let go. Tyrell listened with his enormous eyes fixed on her face. His skin shifted to colors that indicated he was experiencing emotions he did not have words for. The other species called you dangerous, Laura said. They called you aggressive and unpredictable. And they were right about all of that. We are dangerous. We are aggressive. We are unpredictable. But being dangerous does not mean being cruel. And being unpredictable does not mean being uncaring. Sometimes it means showing up when everyone else has given up. Sometimes it means fighting for people who cannot fight for themselves. Tyrell reached out with one of his delicate hands and touched Laura's arm. It was a gesture of profound gratitude in Volani culture, and Laura understood its meaning even without words. Around them, the work continued. Atmospheric processors hummed as they filtered poison from the air. Medical teams treated Volani patients in emergency shelters. Engineers repaired damaged equipment and prepared new units for deployment. Shuttle pilots flew supply runs through dangerous conditions. Everyone worked together toward the same goal. The Volani had been abandoned by the galaxy, but they were not alone anymore. The Deathworlders had come, and they were not leaving until the job was done. The Galactic Concord had expected humanity to fail, and they had been waiting patiently for that failure to happen. Ambassador Korath of the Tarathi hegemony sat in his private chambers aboard the diplomatic station, orbiting the Concord's capital world. He was a tall creature with thick-scaled skin and 4 arms that he kept folded across his chest as he reviewed the latest reports from Valara. His species had been spacefaring for over 12,000 years, and they considered themselves masters of galactic politics. They had seen young species rise and fall countless times throughout history. The humans would be no different. The Deathworlders had made a foolish decision by rushing to save the Volani. Everyone knew that the rescue mission was doomed to fail. The volcanic activity was too severe. The population was too large. The resources required were too vast. Sooner or later, the humans would realize they had bitten off more than they could chew, and they would abandon the project, just like every sensible species would have done from the beginning. Korath checked the reports every day, waiting for news of the inevitable collapse. He expected to see stories about human ships retreating. He expected to see announcements about the mission being scaled back or canceled entirely. He expected the Death Worlders to learn a harsh lesson about the limits of idealism in a cold and uncaring universe, but the reports kept telling a different story. 40 days into the mission, the atmospheric processors had reduced particulate levels across 60% of Valara's inhabited zones. The air was becoming breathable again in regions that had been death traps just weeks before. Evacuation ships had relocated over 50 million Vallani to temporary shelters on orbital platforms in nearby colony worlds where they could recover in safety. Medical teams had treated hundreds of thousands of respiratory cases, and they had developed new treatments specifically designed for Vallani physiology. The death rate, which had been climbing steadily toward extinction, had plummeted. The humans were actually succeeding. Korath read the numbers again and again, trying to find some mistake or exaggeration. But the data was solid. The Death Worlders had committed over 30% of their active fleet to this operation. They had spent resources they could not easily replace. They had lost personnel to accidents and injuries. And yet they continued working without any sign of slowing down or giving up. It made no sense to him. The Vallani had nothing to offer humanity. They had no valuable resources or advanced technology or strategic military position. They were simply a weak and dying species on a poisoned world. Why would anyone sacrifice so much for them? Observer Seleth of the Kesari Collective was asking the same question in the halls of the Concord Assembly. Seleth was an insectoid being with compound eyes that could see in multiple spectrums and a mind that processed information faster than most organic computers. The Kesari were known throughout the galaxy for their cold logic and rational decision-making. They rarely acted on emotion, and they always calculated the costs and benefits of every choice. This is unprecedented, Seleth remarked to a gathering of diplomats from various species. The humans have invested enormous amounts of time and energy and material into saving the Vallani. By any rational measure, this investment cannot possibly produce a positive return. They are operating at a significant loss, with no apparent expectation of compensation. I confess that I do not understand their reasoning. They are fools, Korath replied, though his voice lacked the confidence it usually carried. They are young and naive, and they have not yet learned how the galaxy truly works. This mission will bankrupt them, or exhaust them, or both. Mark my words, they will regret this decision. Will they? Seleth's compound eyes glittered as they focused on the Tarathi ambassador. Or have they understood something that we have not? The question hung in the air like an accusation. None of the assembled diplomats had a good answer for it. News of the human rescue mission had spread far beyond the halls of power. Across the galaxy, ordinary citizens of dozens of species were watching broadcasts from Valara with growing fascination. They saw footage of human workers risking their lives to install equipment in dangerous volcanic zones. They saw human doctors working around the clock to save Vallani patients. They saw human engineers solving problems in hours that would have taken Concord committees months to even discuss. The images were powerful and they stirred something in the hearts of beings who had been taught that the galaxy was a harsh place where only the strong survived. Here were creatures from a death world showing more compassion and courage than all the ancient civilizations combined. Here were the dangerous, aggressive, unpredictable humans proving that strength could be used for kindness instead of conquest. Public opinion began to shift in ways that made the political leaders uncomfortable. The Tarathi homeworld citizens began asking why their government had refused to help the Vallani. On Khazari colony worlds, there were discussions about whether pure logic was really the best guide for making decisions. Even the Malvik, who had ignored the Vallani distress calls, entirely started receiving criticism. From their own population, the Concord had built its power on the idea that every species should look out for itself, and that charity was a weakness that would be exploited by others. But the humans were proving that idea wrong with every life they saved on Valara. On the 73rd day of the mission, something remarkable happened. Tarathi supply convoy appeared in the Valara system without any warning or announcement. The convoy consisted of 3 large transport ships loaded with medical supplies and food and water purification equipment. The captain of the lead vessel transmitted a simple message to the Resolute. "We have supplies. Where do you need us?" Commander Laura Bennett was on the bridge when the message came through, and for a moment she was too surprised to respond. The Tarathi had been among the loudest voices refusing to help the Villani. Their ambassador had called the rescue mission foolish and wasteful, and now here they were offering assistance. She felt tears forming in her eyes, but she blinked them away and composed herself. There would be time to process this later. Right now, there was work to do, and now there were more hands to help do it. "Welcome to the relief effort," she replied. "We could use your help in the southern hemisphere. I am sending coordinates now." The Tarathi convoy was the first outside assistance to arrive, but it was not the last. Over the following weeks, ships from the Khazari Collective and the Malvik Federation and half a dozen other species appeared in the Valara system. Some brought supplies. Others brought personnel. A few brought specialized equipment that the humans did not have access to. The galaxy had watched humanity stand alone against impossible odds, and something had changed. The elder races had spent thousands of years building walls between themselves and everyone else. They had convinced themselves that compassion was weakness and that helping others was foolish. But the Deathworlders from Earth had shown them a different way. And slowly, reluctantly, one species at a time, the galaxy was starting to follow their lead. 1 year after the eruption began, the skies of Valara finally started to clear. The supervolcano that had nearly destroyed an entire civilization had exhausted itself at last. The rivers of lava cooled and hardened into black stone. The earthquakes grew weaker and less frequent until they stopped entirely. The ash clouds that had blocked out the sun for so long began to thin and scatter as the atmospheric processors continued their tireless work. Elder Counselor Tyrell stood at the edge of what had once been his settlement's central plaza, and he watched the sunrise for the first time in over a year. The light was pale and golden, and it painted the recovering landscape in colors he had thought he would never see again. Tears streamed down his translucent face, but they were tears of joy and gratitude and overwhelming relief. He had prepared himself to die on this world. He had accepted that his species would fade into extinction like so many others before them, but he had been wrong. The Villani were still alive. 400 million of his people had survived because strangers from across the galaxy had refused to let them perish. Commander Laura Bennett stood beside him watching the same sunrise. She was exhausted in ways that went deeper than physical tiredness. The past year had demanded everything she had to give and more. She had lost friends and colleagues to accidents on this dangerous world. She had made impossible decisions under impossible pressure. She had pushed herself and her crew to their absolute limits day after day after day. But they had done it. They had actually done it. The plaza around them was filled with activity as construction. Crews worked to rebuild what the disaster had destroyed. Villani architects directed the placement of new structures while human engineers operated heavy machinery. Workers from a dozen different species labored side by side, hauling materials and laying foundations and raising walls. The sound of construction filled the air like music. "We would have died," Tyrell said softly, without taking his eyes off the rising sun. "Every single one of us would have died if you had not come. There would be nothing left of the Villani except ruins and bones and forgotten memories." Laura did not know how to respond to that. The weight of what they had accomplished was still too enormous for her to fully understand. She had led a mission that saved an entire species from extinction. She had changed the course of galactic history. She had proven that humanity was more than the dangerous Deathworlders. That everyone feared. "You would have fought," she finally said. "Your people are stronger than you know. You held on long enough for help to arrive." That took courage. Tyrell turned to look at her, and his skin flickered with colors that she had learned to recognize as deep affection and respect. "Perhaps," he said, "but we did not have to fight alone. That is what matters. Because of you and because of humanity, we did not have to face the darkness by ourselves." Laura shook her head gently. "Not just humanity," she said. "Not anymore. Look around you. The Tarathi are here. The Khazari are here. Even the Malvik eventually sent ships. The whole galaxy came together in the end." Tyrell considered her words for a moment before responding. They came because you showed them the way, he said. They watched you sacrifice and struggle and refuse to give up, and something changed inside them. You reminded them of who they could be instead of who they had become. That is a gift more valuable than all the atmospheric processors in the universe. Across the plaza, a group of Villani. Children were playing among the construction equipment. They chased each other and laughed, and their skin glowed with bright, happy colors. A human worker named Daniel Hayes had stopped his welding work to watch them with a smile on his tired face. He had been on Valara for 8 months, and he had seen more suffering than anyone should ever have to see. But moments like this made it all worthwhile. One of the children ran up to him and tugged on his sleeve. She was small, even by Villani's standards, with enormous curious eyes and skin that shimmered like starlight. "Are you a Death Worlder?" she asked in accented but understandable Galactic. Standard. Daniel knelt down so he could look at her face to face. "I am," he said. "I come from a planet called Earth." The child tilted her head, studying him with obvious fascination. "My mother says Death Worlders are scary," she said, "but you do not seem scary to me. You seem nice." Daniel laughed, and the sound was warm and genuine. "Well," he said, "maybe that is because being scary and being nice are not opposites. Sometimes the scariest people are also the kindest. It just depends on who you are trying to protect." The child thought about this for a moment, and then she smiled and ran back to join her friends. Daniel watched her go, and he felt something loosen in his chest. This was why they had come. This was why they had sacrificed so much. So that children could laugh and play and grow up to live full lives on a world that had almost killed them all, back on Earth. Admiral Patricia Cruz received the final mission report in her office at Orbital Command. She read through the numbers, slowly taking her time to absorb every detail. The cost had been significant. 23 human lives lost to accidents and equipment failures and medical complications. Resources stretched thin across the entire fleet. Political capital spent that would take years to rebuild. But 400 million? Villani were alive because of what humanity had done. Cruz set down the report and looked out her window at the blue and green marble of Earth floating in the darkness. Her planet had always been a harsh and demanding world. It had shaped humanity into survivors and fighters and stubborn idealists who refused to accept defeat. For a long time, the galaxy had feared what those qualities might mean for their future. Now they knew. The galaxy had called humanity dangerous, and they had been right. Humans were dangerous to anyone who threatened innocent lives. The galaxy had called humanity aggressive, and they had been right about that too. Humans were aggressive in defense of those who could not defend themselves. The galaxy had called humanity unpredictable, and that was perhaps the most accurate description of all. Because when every other species had looked at the Villani and calculated that saving them was not worth the cost, humanity had looked at the same situation and decided that some things were more important than calculations, the Death Worlders had shown. The galaxy, what they were truly capable of. Not conquest or destruction or domination, but compassion and sacrifice and hope. On Valara. The sun continued to rise higher in the clearing sky. The atmospheric processors hummed quietly as they finished their work. The construction crews kept building, and the medical teams kept healing, and the Villani kept living, and somewhere in the halls of the Galactic Concord, the elder races were already beginning to understand that everything had changed. The young species from the dangerous little world called Earth had rewritten the rules of how civilizations treated each other. They had proven that strength meant nothing without kindness, and that power meant nothing without compassion. The Villani would never forget what humanity had done for them. Neither would the rest of the galaxy. The Death Worlders had come to save a dying world. And in doing so, they had shown the universe what it truly meant to be human.